Welcome, everyone, to the March event 2026 for Anthropology and Praxis. Today's session is Anthropology and Praxis Publishing Outside Academia. And we have two really great speakers. We're really excited to have everyone here and them to share their practical tips and experience with us today. So to get us started, I will go through a couple slides and we'll have our introductions of our speakers, and then we'll stop the recording from there and we'll have a discussion the rest of the time. So that's kind of the model that we've been going with. For those of us that are new to our session today or new to anthropology and praxis, hopefully you've had a chance to visit our website. And if you have, you've probably learned about us a little bit, but we are dedicated to providing a forum to practicing professional applied anthropologists for the exchange of ideas, information, and experiences related to the practical application of anthropology and ethnography. We are working to build a community in Canada of anthropologists working outside of academia and those working inside as well. And we are the official network for PPA, so Practicing Professional Applied Anthropologists in Canada for CASCA. And we launched that last May officially. And membership is free. We are a Google group, so that's how we predominantly communicate with the group. So if you've signed up for the group, that's how you're getting your information. We also are on LinkedIn, but we keep the group invitations private. And then we have virtual meetups. We've been meeting bi-monthly since we launched. And this is really about being driven by our community and what our community would like to see. And this is all brought to you by our volunteer conveners. Some of us are here, some of us are not. So maybe put up your hand if those of you can see you. So Cora, Wood, and Gemma, and myself, Natalie. I don't know if anyone else is here. Let's see. I don't think so. We're missing Kai and Craig who help us out. Okay, so today we're gathered here to talk about anthropologists working outside of academia and how to publish your work. So this is the statement that we made in our flyer. Anthropologists working outside of academia can struggle with where and how to publish their work, a lack of awareness of non-academic publishing options, acceptable writing standards, and not knowing what is publishable are common areas of concern. Confidentiality agreements with clients can also constrain or make it difficult for practitioners to understand what and how they can publish their work. So this session was meant to explore these ideas and these questions and provide some practical publishing guidance to our network members. So today we have two colleagues that I haven't seen for a long time, so it's exciting to see them. Eshe Lewis, who's a cultural anthropologist and currently working at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, and Suanna Crowley, who's an archaeologist with her own organization called Headfort Consulting out of Boston, and she's also currently the president of NAPA, the National Anthropological, I just messed that up, of NAPA. So I'm going to get the two of you to do introductions, and then your faces will go on the screen for everyone to see. So Eshe, how about you? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how it relates to publishing in academia. I know you have some very specific experience that we're excited to hear about today.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I am a cultural anthropologist by training, born and raised in Toronto, Treaty 13. I was a student of Latin American studies and Caribbean studies first, and then ended up in anthropology. So I studied in the States. Um, and I have always been inclined towards public or professional anthropology. My work has predominantly been around Afro-descendants in Latin America and the Caribbean. Um, and I did a lot of work on gender violence and social movement organizing. And I think for me, I was always interested in how I could share my work with people, whether that was the people I was working with. I wanted them to be able to understand what I was writing about them. There's a real power dynamic that I think anthropologists deal with a lot. And so for me, that was very important. But then also, I think during my gender violence work, it really became clear to me that I wouldn't have felt comfortable talking to people, asking them to share their experiences if I wasn't going to try to do something about it, because I was hearing really horrific stories. And so I was involved in publishing reports for the Peruvian government. I did my dissertation work in Lima, Peru, and I ended up writing reports for them. I have co-authored reports for the United Nations Population Fund on gender violence in Latin America. So another kind of public writing. And then I actually ended up publishing at Sapiens magazine, which was an anthropology publication. It has since closed, but is still alive online as an archive of sorts. And I was at Sapiens for 5 years after I ended up publishing with them. So I ended up running a group, a program for budding anthropologists to teach them about public anthropology writing, podcasting, how to share their work with the world, and particularly with non-academic publics. So that was my life for about 5 years. And now I sprinkle anthropology on the work that I do at the museum. That has not directly report turned into writing, but it's ever present with me. So that, in a very large nutshell, is my experience with academic publishing. Oh, I didn't mention academic publishing. I did publish articles while I was still in grad school and teaching for a bit. So I have had some experience that runs the gamut when it comes to publishing.
Well, thank you so much, Eshe. It is, you do have a lot of experience that runs the gamut, and I appreciate that. Suanna from the National Association for Practicing Anthropologists.
So
I
many
had to make
acronyms.
sure, I know, I had to make sure I corrected myself. I drew a blank in the moment.
No, I mean, we're surrounded by acronyms, and they're a form of communication that we need to unravel and demystify. So I think it's kind of a great way to start thinking about how we communicate with wider audiences. So my name is Suanna Crowley, and I am based in the Boston area. Grew up in Washington, D.C., and I finished a PhD at New York University. So I've sort of hugged the East Coast of the US, but started life thinking I was going to be a Near Eastern archaeologist. So I spent a lot of time in Syria and Pakistan. My specialty is actually geoarchaeology. So I'm an archaeologist who doesn't deal with artifacts at all. I deal with landscapes. And I have, because of that, I have developed a special nickname that is Dr. Dirt. And that's the nickname that I quite often do science communication talks under, particularly when I'm talking to younger audiences. So my journey in this sort of sphere of public communication really started as an undergraduate. And the very first job that I had as an archaeologist, and that really involved interpreting. As an archaeologist, went to school in Williamsburg, Virginia, the College of William and Mary, kind of big tourist destination. And my first job was at Mount Vernon, the home of George Washington. And in both spaces, we were kind of required as archaeologists to step up to the velvet rope and interpret what we were seeing, what we were doing, answer questions. And so from a very early stage, I was trying to figure out how to, make really good information memorable, maybe snackable. I always think of it in terms of, how can I help somebody walk away with something that they've learned and can use in their own lives. And so that sort of became kind of a parallel journey for me, not just completing the archaeology PhD stuff, but learning how a little bit more deeply how we generate data and discovery and how we put it out there into the world. So I did not pursue academic positions. I went right into cultural resources management, if you're familiar with that field. In the United States, that's a $2 billion industry. So Dr. Dirt had a place to go, but that's a very tough job when you're a woman and you want to have children. It's about 75–90% travel. So I decided I wanted to have children, and I needed to pivot into something that would, allow me to pay the mommy tax a little less stressfully. And I turned back to that public outreach and public communication side. I worked in museums. I became a development director doing the fundraising messaging. I became an advocacy and public policy person, going to state legislatures in Capitol Hill in the US to do advocacy and talk about preservation, student loans, tribal concerns. And I also did a lot of science communication. And it was learning sort of this, unexpected master's degree in science communication that I developed when I really stepped outside of anthropology and worked with astrophysicists and marine biologists and AI startup technology places. I put my own shingle out and developed a little consulting firm, Headfort Consulting, where I didn't do archaeology per se, but I really tried to solve the big problems around how do we get information out in the public that is trustable, that is genuine, that moves dialogues, moves policy, those kinds of questions. Um, I have, because children are expensive, come back into cultural resource management. I have my Headfort Consulting on the side, and I still do a lot of work doing science communication and fundraising. But I've gone back into cultural resource management for a large national firm called SWCA. And there I'm a principal investigator, not just managing big archaeology projects, but solving those wicked problems about how do we communicate to our clients, to our stakeholders, to tribal nations, to descendant communities, to policymakers, these complex and what they might perceive to be complicated and murky histories, right? We feel very close as archaeologists to these stories and to these artifacts and to these landscapes, but there's a translation factor. And so my work in that space, and also the work that I do with NAPA, has really focused on solving these problems, engaging audiences that are hostile as well as receptive, the curious public as well as the trolls that are out there. And so I really admire and I'm in awe of what Eshe has done in her career. So I'm equally excited to learn from her experience. But I'll bring just a slightly different flavor to the how-to discussion.
Thank you, Suanna. And I'm sure everyone can see why we invited these two experienced professionals to the table today. So we really appreciate you both taking so much time with us today and just prepping for this conversation. The next slide is a reminder of some questions. So the model that we have that we use every time is there's some guiding questions. I'll stop sharing and then I'll have the questions available to remind us where we're at in the conversation. We'll talk for about 30 to 40 minutes and then we'll open it up for discussion. And as I mentioned, we'll stop the recording when the discussion happens, and that way the what's recorded is just what we are presenting in these questions. So let me run through the questions. The first one is, tell us about your publishing experience as an anthropologist. You can continue some specifics and tell us more about some of what you've shared so far. What outlets or mainstream options do PPA anthropologists have in Canada and the US to publish their work? So sadly, Sapiens is no longer around, but what other, I can even just based on your introductions, there's opportunities there that I hadn't considered before, right? When we think about our own industries or our work. So if there's something there to talk about. What writing guidance, tips, resources, and additional skills learning do you recommend for publishing outside of academia? What is the peer review process for publishing outside academia? So that's something that is very heavily guided inside of academia, but something it certainly looks different outside. And what tips or guidance do you have for PPA anthropologists presenting at conferences? Because that's another place that we communicate our work. So panels versus papers and workshops. And I know that you both have some experience with that. So I will stop sharing the slides and we can have a conversation. If whoever wants to jump in first, if you want to share more about your publishing experience as an anthropologist. Stop sharing. There we go. Suanna, you're off mute. Do you want to take a crack at it?
Okay. Okay. So, full confession here to a friendly group. I am just on Monday was accepted for my very first solo authored peer-reviewed journal article. Bucket list item. And this is both joyful and sad in some ways, because I am 54 years old and it should not have taken me this long. But I came through graduate school at a time when there wasn't really the mindset around fostering students through that process. and in the same way that there is now. I mean, we really see it as, bringing along people who have the opportunity to, publish in peer-reviewed spaces, as, something that, your academic advisors can really bring you through and teach you, transmit that knowledge. My advisors were not into that model, so I had to strike out on my own and find other ways to, express myself. And in those cases, I've really focused on non-academic publishing in spaces that are either authored by me or actually ghostwriting. I've done an enormous amount of ghostwriting for other scholars who can't get over a writer's block or just need other kinds of support. So in that sense, I've done publishing that is more blog and video content creation. I've done some congressional testimony writing. I've done other kinds of op-eds and letter writing campaigns, social media campaigns, press releases, press kits, things of that nature. And so the work that I do is either working on something that I'm researching and pushing it out into the world in ways that general publics can engage with it, or supporting other researchers from different kinds of sciences, not just anthropology. And so to that end, I've learned a little bit about, kind of now that I have this unique experience of paper coming out in the Advances for Archaeological Practice, an SAA publication. I'm super excited. I've really been able to sort of see both sides. To that end, I would just also sort of seed the conversation with a quick idea that is, maybe many of you know that the American Anthropological Association, the largest association here in the United States, is now converting its 22 journal portfolio and condensing it down to probably 3 or 4 journals only. And they're also standing up a new journal called tentatively Anthropological Praxis. I've been, as NAPA president, sitting on the inside of that process, and it is a whole other picture of academic publishing and what's going on in the marketplace around academic publishing, what publishers are looking for and what they want, not just editors. And so I think the publishing space for academic journals has gotten a much more tense place for little old me to try and publish her first little article. But I'm remaining hopeful. I'm holding my tongue on some of the decisions that are being made and trying to push forward in good ways. But I'm hopeful that we're seeing a moment where multimedia publishing or just sort of go right to press, you and your website, you and blog spaces, where you can take the content, the research that you've done, break it up across multiple platforms, academic journal, public-facing pieces, and other kinds of sort of internal or external communications.
Suanna, thank you for that. And thank you for the insight of what's happening with the journals. I think that also speaks to the competitiveness that I think that's what you're speaking to as well. And the thing that I took away mostly is, what do we call publishing outside academia? There you listed a bunch of things that I think we could all embrace. And it's not just writing a blog or a journal article in a non-academic setting. You listed a number of things that are actually considered publishing outside of academia. And for me personally, that just really registered. And I know that you have some slides to share. So if you wanted to do that after Eshe shares her experience, or whenever you thought that was suitable.
They're mostly kind of in the category of the tips or encouragement, inspiration. So we can run through a couple of those when we want to tackle that question.
Great, awesome. Eshe, how about you to share a little bit more about the publishing experience that you've had as an anthropologist?
Sure. So I think, as I mentioned, I have published in academic journals. One of my publications was actually ethnographic fiction. I think for me, that was probably one of my most meaningful publications, not because I'm some sort of prolific writer, but because I also work with a group of people who are terribly underrepresented, and the idea of having a piece written about them that isn't about statistics, about how horrible life can be for them, or having them be some sort of prop in somebody else's story, meant something. And especially in academia, where even in anthropology, we still deal with this issue of um, trying to untangle whether it's racism or classism or sexism from the work that we do and show honest representations of the people we work with. So I'm throwing that in there into what is already a very mixed bag of what can be considered publications. Um, I really enjoyed a lot of the writing that I did that was reports. It was very different from academic writing. Um, and I really enjoyed it because it's much more succinct. You don't have to go through necessarily a giant literature review. Personally, as I was studying as both a master's and a PhD student, I knew that I wanted to be outside of academia, and so there was less constraints on me in that sense. But anthropology as a discipline, my gosh, we are wordy, right? Like 30 pages, and sometimes it has to be at least X amount of pages, single spaced. Um, and I, was under the tutelage of professors who were about to retire. For the most part, some of the best lessons that I learned about how to be a social scientist and to write came from people who no longer had to play the game of cranking out publications. And so I was taught you write what you need to write. And when you're done talking or you're done with your point, you stop writing. And so that was intention a lot of the time with this must be this, I felt like I was fighting to fill up the page. And I was freed from that when I started to engage in other kinds of writing. Um, I think it's quite difficult at times to deal with the academic publishing world. Some of the tips that I have, and we can come back to this when we're ready for that, but really is figuring out how to advocate for yourself because I have gotten into fights with peer reviewers, right, about how they a lot of, as I said, working with Afro-Peruvian women, I really wrote a lot of the first documents that explain gender violence from a race perspective for that group of people. And so this demand for citations, I could not meet that because I was talking about people who they hadn't been written about. And so then it became this question of, well, are you a credible source? And what that means, which is kind of offensive, but you really have to figure out how to, I don't want to say stand your ground. I feel like we've beaten that horse to death, but really stand up for what you know is true and ethical and fair. And I can come back to this after, right? But just to say that you will have to, defending the validity of your research also extends to those ethical questions about how you should be referring to people, how you should be describing experiences, and defending your own authority as the person who's done the work. That is probably one of the most important elements of writing that I think extends um, across the space of all the different kinds of writing platforms, right? Not backing down when you know that you know what you're talking about. Um, so I think I'd put a pin in it there, since I think a lot of the things that we will discuss will, bring up a lot of these as well. The last thing that I will just say is probably turnaround times. There's just like such a vast diversity in terms of what is expected um, as you write. And so again, this is probably getting into tips as well, but those deadlines and the expectations they differ a lot. And so sometimes it can be really helpful before you get into writing anything to just sort of think through who you're writing for, but also like what the timeline is. I was
Mhm.
shocked when I think I wrote with Sapiens and I'd been used to academic journals where you have to wait, months to even find out if they were gonna accept you. And by accept you, it's, write the paper and then we still have to submit it to peer review, right? And Sapiens was saying, well, we can turn this around in 2, 3 months, depending on how fast you work. And I was like, so there really just is a plethora of places that you can write. And so I think the thing that I would always tell anyone who's interested in this is um, to probably expand your own horizons. Like really think
Mm,
about who you want to read
mm,
your work, because when we say writing for the public, non-academic public, most of the world are not academics. I know it feels like that
mm,
when we're in academia, but like most of the world will never have a PhD, will never go to grad school. Um, so the majority of the world, right? And that is a huge public that can be broken down into more of them. So think about what you want to write and like where that might fit best, and use that
mm.
to guide you as a starting point. Um, but I'll stop there, Natalie, and we can come back to those kinds of things.
No, it's great. It's great advice about thinking about who you want to write for and the turnaround times. I co-authored a annotated bibliography for Oxford Bibliographies. I've lost count of how many years. I was just thinking to myself how many years it's been. I think we're in year 3 and it still hasn't been published. And I haven't heard anything in about 7 months, 6 months, 7 months. So it's yeah, it's quite a and some of the data and information that we published in that write up is now 2 to 3 years old. Like there's been reports on that topic that have come out since that would be actually more helpful than the ones that we included in the bibliography. So that was quite an extreme and something very different for me from working in the private and public sector. Okay, second question. Let's think about the outlets or mainstream options. So Suanna, you started talking about and you mentioned things that we might not be thinking about when we talk about what is publishing. So, what are the mainstream options for PPA anthropologists in Canada and the US to share our work?
So I think there are a number of spaces that you can think about, as options for you. And when we go into the tips, I think my slides will help make a little bit more sense. And certainly, Natalie, you're very welcome to share the slides out for anyone who wants to like look at them slowly and consume them in peace and quiet. Um, but absolutely, to Eshe's point, that time horizon can vary pretty widely. And so one of the places that I kind of recommend folks take a chance on is really working in a space that has more to do with sort of op-eds or letters to the editor, or being responsive as a source for quotes with journalists. And those are sort of, they're not directly you publishing, but you are being published. Your work is being published, particularly if you're being interviewed by a journalist. If you're writing an op-ed, of course, you're standing for your own thinking and research and perspective. But in those cases, you're looking at turnaround times that can be hours. So having a sense of being able to jump on, a timely issue that's presenting itself in the news, you may have a connection point to it. You can absolutely pitch to an editor of a local newspaper or a local, usually it's a newspaper or another print outlet, but it does happen with broadcast journalism as well. You can contribute your thoughts to that. And I've helped a number of people write either very structured letters to the editor or op-eds. I'm working on an op-ed project for another organization now where they're actually going to shove me out in front of that. So we're taking that one a little bit more slowly, but it's a predictable news cycle that I can work on a little bit more generously. But those are really kind of thrilling and exciting experiences that you can take a chance on. Um, as a consultant, I helped a group of professors in anthropology at San Francisco State University start to think about how they can engage with op-eds. And because they were trying to, build the reputation of their department, also create a little content cycle wheel as they created these sort of quick turnaround pieces of publishing, and were able to not just have that publication, but put it back out in front of students, deans, alumni, et cetera, as part of that virtuous cycle that appeared in social media for the department. So you can do things that are sort of that quick turnaround time frame. Other kinds of projects that I think are ones that we can, access pretty readily are blog pieces. And if any of you know of the Anthropology Career Readiness Network, which operates in the U.S. and has lots of Canadian friends supporting it, that's a really robust blog called the World of Work blog. It's if you've done it, it's kind of surprising. It's not just you putting words on a page. You're going to go through an editor cycle or review cycle with the folks that manage that. And it's really kind of a wonderful way to create that short piece where you are, condensing your thinking, pointing that lens outward and taking what you're working on and not just sort of thinking about it in that internal sort of solo artist way that we think about things as academics, but you're turning the lens outward, and there's a translation there that's kind of a fun challenge to meet. I personally think. The other thing that I would kind of recommend, if you're feeling frustrated, and we'll talk about this in the tips, I wouldn't, charge the hill and try to get your op-ed piece in the New York Times first. I would go with the small wins and try to build up from there. You can stand up your own kind of publishing voice in different spaces. A lot of people are doing that through their own websites. Substack is another environment that folks are kind of actively on as a more engaged blog space, a little bit more than the old WordPress. Other spaces that I like to sort of test out my mettle as an author is inside of we think of them as industry newsletters. These are or can be, pieces of writing that get out in front of a very large number of people. Napa has its own Napa Notes, which is distributed to probably 500 or 600 people generally. I have to write something for that every quarter. Sometimes I contribute an extra article, but it puts me in the mindset of being productive. It's short, it's condensed, it's not academic, but it is a challenge in a lot of ways. And I do get feedback, and I do have to stand up for what it is that I'm talking about. Is that, the glossy headline that you're expecting in the Washington Post or the interview with NPR? No, but it can lead to that. And I mentioned the fact that you can sort of put yourself out in other spaces. One of the networks that I'm attached to that I recommend you explore is a website and a service called Help a Reporter Out, haro.com. And this is a space where you get pitches from journalists. And if you feel connected to something, you can write back in and pitch yourself and pitch a quote. And I've been engaged by a couple of journalists through that over the years and had some fun thinking about anthropology or other kinds of sciences that I've been engaged in, archaeology specifically, and talking to journalists. So my mindset isn't just the publishing and the writing piece, although I absolutely agree with everything that Eshe has described, but it's also about being that public intellectual and, with your own voice and with your own sort of, guidelines, putting yourself in spaces where you can deliver really interesting and important key pieces of information about what you're studying, what you're interested in, where you'd like to go with your research.
Suanna, thank you. Thank you for the reminding of Harrow, and I'm going to include what we do at the end of this is we have a set of slides, and we're going to capture the links and some resources, and we're going to share that with everyone as well. So thank you for all of that. Some great points. Eshe, what do you have to add? I mean, I was thinking the conversation is something that is an outlet in Canada as well that we might be able to tap into. But how about from you? What outlets, mainstream options, maybe specifically to Canada or abroad, that you would recommend?
So I think a lot of I did a search in Canada. It can be really difficult to find outlets that are Canadian outside of what would look much more like journalistic writing, which isn't necessarily a problem, but a lot of the times, I mean, first of all, we know that media in Canada is shrinking a lot, which is very alarming for a number of reasons. But also internally, a lot of news outlets have their own, journalists on staff, right? So not every outlet is going to be looking for or amenable to receiving outside writing. That said, Royal Canadian Geographic is really, really interesting. There's a lot that goes into that publication. And from what I can tell, they have a pitch for us section. So a lot of the places that you can think about the places that you get articles from, and you can go back and you can check to see if they have a pitch for us section. Um, there are probably more well-known outlets. I'm thinking Nautilus, Aeon, The Atlantic, Scientific American, Nature, depending on what it is that you're writing. There are a lot of smaller but very reputable outlets. The conversation has at this point in time, they've decentralized. So there's the conversation Australia, there's a conversation Canada, and you get articles that run the gamut. They have their own distinct processes, but similar to what Suanna was saying, if you're writing an op-ed that might be shorter, tied to current events, something that might be top of mind, or on vogue, so to speak, in terms of what's happening politically or culturally that you might want to write in about. You can you can find ways to connect with journalists and become sources, and especially if you have your own website and whatnot. I just served as a expert in a Spanish publication through a Spanish newspaper about gender and the evolution of what we might understand to be believability in women when it comes to gender violence. But you can also, depending on your own interest level, do something that's kind of smart, which is look, if you are academically trained, you can look through um, academic outlets, and you can find articles that you find interesting and translate them for the Nautilus, right? Like you can say, there's this really interesting study that has just come out, or there's this, big news in the anthro world, but it's written in academies, and I would like to translate it. You then can pitch that story. You can contact the people who wrote the article. You can pull all of that together. So there are ways in which you can be creative and you can use your skills as someone who understands the academic scholarly background of the discipline, and marry that with your ability or your desire to share this with the public and sort of break down what are the big ideas. Why should people care about this? What is the story that's involved? I'll talk about those elements a bit more in the tips that I have, because I actually find that that is one of the biggest humps for people to get over when it comes to switching gears and trying to publish for people who are not academically trained or interested in reading academic work. But there are a number of things that you can do. Books, I don't know why. I guess as I'm talking, I'm remembering things, but I've published book articles, right? Books, if you are in academia, don't really count for much on unless it's your own book, right? If you contribute a book chapter, depending on the institution you're in, they may not see that as something that might contribute towards tenure, for instance. I have a lot to say about publish or perish. I think it's done a tremendous disservice to all of us, and I think it's really changed the way people are expected to write and to read in ways that I don't know are particularly helpful to us. But that aside, I think there's a lot that you can do with those skills. I think a big part of NAPA and a lot of what people who are interested in encouraging other people to do public anthropology try to tell people is that you have a lot of skills that you're probably taking for granted, that we just assume everybody has. And the more time you spend outside of those spaces, you realize that you actually do have different skills. And so it's really also about figuring out how to harness the capabilities that you have and turn that into something that is palatable for a broader audience, whatever audience that may be. But yes, there are tons of outlets. It doesn't have to be New York Times. Again, think about who you want to read your work, right? Maybe it isn't that kind of audience. I think I really encourage people to look at smaller newspapers. As Suanna said, there's a lot of newsletters that go out. There are so many places that you can take your work or, sort of build your confidence in public writing. But those outlets that I also mentioned, you will find anthropologists publishing through all of them. And you might not even recognize it because you're not used to seeing anthropology written about that way. But when you click those bios, you start noticing that there are anthropologists everywhere. So that could be you as well.
We are everywhere. We just have to find each other. Thank you so much, Eshe, for providing all of those examples. And I think back to what Suanna had mentioned before about social media and sharing your ideas, for those of us that are in professions and are on LinkedIn articles are really helpful, linking back to your own website. This also builds your own credibility in that field to continue on with some of the threads that Eshe and Suanna had pointed out, because journalists are going to look you up and all that sort of thing. So great ideas. Thank you. And now we're going to move to the tips. So Suanna, do you want to, we'll go 15. We're going to try to wrap it up at the top of the hour for those of us in a top of the hour location. If not, it would be at the half past. So we got 12 to 15 minutes. Do you want to share? Did you have a response, and do you want me to tee up your slides here for you?
Yeah, that'd be great. And
Okay.
another true confession. I am getting my co-pilot's license, which is my company. The national archaeology firm that I'm with is now training me to do a lot of work on Microsoft Copilot. So
Hmm.
today was an experiment in taking a short LinkedIn article that I wrote and prompting Copilot to help me create a slideshow. So feedback welcome on that. I did edit it. It's not all of the bot's words, but it's another experiment for us to think about as a resource or a tool for the publishing space.
Oh,
So absolutely, next slide would be
yeah.
great.
Good reminder. And it looks great.
So far, so good. Okay, so this is just the concept: good to eat, good to think. Something anthropologists will recognize. Next slide, please. And really, the tips that are here is really to help you start to think about the kind of bubble that we all kind of sit in as we're going through our training and our graduate studies. Eshe mentioned, that the world is not as full of PhDs as you might think. In fact, I saw a statistic that only about 3% of the world, the current global population, has a PhD. And so we're still, those of us who've gone to that end are still fairly rare in the circuit, and I think means that we still have something to contribute. But we have to break out of our bubble, and we have to start to not just consume the academic material over and over again. We have to explore, and we have to think about what might be good to think about outside of that particular bubble. And to that end is, something that Eshe had mentioned, is that exploration, finding those different platforms, those different audiences, those different authors that you would like to be a part of and engage. This is a process of learning that editorial voice that these other outlets have. You get a sense of it when you work with the editors of a peer-reviewed journal. Those other spaces have, an editorial voice that you may align with and you may be able to contribute to. But something that I kind of encourage people to do is a little bit of that, challenge mindset, thrill seeking to break out of your bubble. I once helped a tenure track professor at Arizona State University with a conundrum, and the conundrum was she was approached by national NPR, National Public Radio, for an interview about her work. It was with regard to the rise of the GLP-1 medications, and she studied the sort of the anthropological impact of size and body size perceptions across cultures. And she said to me, I feel dirty and I don't want to talk to them about my research. And I had to coax her toward that, challenge mindset. Here's an audience you might be able to connect with your research and also do some good with your university and your tenure track pursuit. So next slide. Eshe also mentioned this. It's so amazing that we're kind of aligning on some of these ideas. Next slide. It's that exploration and really think about becoming an avid reader. This was advice my mom gave me as a kid. To be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. And you have, the onboard software that it takes to do the research and the exploration. So, for your purposes, turn that anthropological mind onto the outlets. Start consuming. Really notice, style, structure, content. Think about and explore, download those style guides, see if those are things that you can, produce work in. Publications like op-eds and other kinds of spaces have very different style guides than we're used to. And so you're going to need to translate or adapt in some ways. The other thing you're going to learn a lot about are the audiences, and this is a big piece that, to be perfectly honest, the process of trying to help the AAA stand up a new journal is very frustrating to me, because the teams that are there are not understanding the concept of audience in the way that I think is going to be helpful for this new journal. That's an editorial piece. But the more you gain in understanding audiences, the more you're going to be able to connect with those audiences as you write outside of academic spaces. Next slide, Natalie. This is that new audience piece. Next slide. So here's some, pro tips, and you can look at these a little bit later as the slides get shared. But start to be that good ethnographic researcher about the audiences and the platforms that you are wanting to engage with. There are a lot of pieces of information around the about pages, around the engagement metrics. You can start looking at the marketing data that they produce, not just those how to pitch. Inside those how to pitch links on websites for different kinds of outlets, you can find out more about who they're connecting with. And is that an audience that you want to deliver your social science data to? This is about right sizing or fitting you as a writer with the audiences of the outlets, and there are myriad outlets to engage with. So again, that thrill-seeking mindset is going to take you a long way. Next slide. This is that starting small. Next slide. And as I said, very few of us land that very first New York Times op-ed. My 20-year-old daughter, who is an economics major out on the West Coast, she has 8 publications to her name now. One of them is a peer-reviewed journal piece. The others are small pieces, those industry newsletter pieces where she's gaining some ability communicating with industry audiences in her space. But one of them is an op-ed. And when she wrote an op-ed as a 15-year-old, she sent it to the Washington Post. And it was about a marine science and marine conservation topic. You don't normally get, a formal rejection letter. They usually just don't even reply. But the editor at the Washington Post wrote back and said, "We're not taking it, but keep going, kid." And she eventually landed a small paper. She got herself the publication. And as she had that small win that really built a lot of confidence. Go for those small wins and build up a portfolio that really expresses your strength and expands your learning about these platforms. Okay, I think there's just one more slide. Realizing the gain. Next slide. One of the things that I mentioned before, and Eshe has hinted at as well, is also developing a content creation mindset. We do so much as researchers, we see so much as anthropologists, that you may be walking right past interesting pieces of content you could be writing up. So as you sort of tune the lens on the outlets and the audiences, start to frame your mindset and look for those small pieces of information that you can expand on in a blog or an article or a video piece. These are observational. We're, at the core of observation. And when you're able to look at what you're already doing and translate it into maybe smaller, but not any less impactful pieces, you're realizing that gain for your own career trajectory and confidence as a writer. Okay, last slide. So, little summing up, explore, explore, explore. Definitely do your reading. Find some of those tools that you can use to understand the communities that you're trying to reach or the editorial networks that you're trying to work with. Definitely starting small is a legitimate and excellent way to go as you build up a writing portfolio. And then realize that gain by trying to think about some double duty opportunities. I still have not published my dissertation. I really, suddenly I feel like I got to do that, but I need a smaller subset of that. And I'm going to go back in there and think about what have I done that I could think about some more, add something to, and create something new from that's already there and might be useful. So the last slide is just how you can find me. Thank you, Anthropology in Praxis.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Again, we'll share those slides with the group. I'm going to stop sharing those. Thank you so much, Suanna. Those are great points and help to pull together a few things that you both have said and captured them as well. So Eshe, how about you? What can you provide additional thoughts on guidance on tips, resources, peer review process, all of the above?
Well, as I mentioned in my intro, I've had the unique privilege of working inside of a magazine that focused on anthropology for a while. So I am going to pass on some of the lessons I have learned, not only as a writer myself, but being surrounded by really brilliant anthropologists who are very effective public writers. Um, Number one, if you're coming from academia, the hardest truth to accept is that when you write for the public, the major difference is that you are writing for people who are not obligated to read your work. There's not going to be a class, you're not going to a conference. You don't have to fight your way through something you don't want to read. Your public doesn't have to read it. So you have to switch your mind to start thinking about how to write something that can reach someone who doesn't have your expertise or the level of closeness that you have with with who you work with. How can you make your writing and how can you make the stories, and I think that that is a keyword, story, palatable for them? How can you pull people into your work? I think a really important thing to learn how to do is how to break down your research into those elements, kind of like Suanna was saying when you're reading other people's work. What is your story? How are you pulling people in? What is the main idea that you want people to get? You can write so many articles. You don't have to cram everything into one. You can't, because most of the outlets you'll be writing for, maximum, if you are writing like a full long article, you're probably getting somewhere around 2,500 words. You can't fit your whole dissertation into one article, and you shouldn't. What you want to do is you want to find your story and you want to focus on that. Figure out how to pull people in. What are you going to share about this experience that's going to make someone want to read more? And you can actually work through some of this by pitching itself. Pitching is different than writing an abstract, right? What you're doing when you're pitching is you're breaking this story down. You're giving people a snapshot, not only of who you are and what is your expertise, right? So you want to make it clear who you are, why someone should read your work, and then share a compelling story. And you can do this by looking at the other publications on whatever platform it is you're looking at, so that you can get an idea, because you're going to be working probably with one of those editors. So doing that research is going to help you to understand how to frame your work so that it makes sense to the public, but also makes sense to the people you will be working with. They have to want to publish you too, right? Who are you? What is the story? What can you offer? What is the insight? How are you going to do this? And what are your sources? In some ways, it mirrors a bit of the format that you're used to in academic writing, but you have to be a lot more succinct. Number two, jargon is really helpful when you're working with an in-group of people who all understand what you're saying. But it is also the easiest way to exclude an audience that is not part of that in-group. So really combing through your writing and figuring out what is an in what is indoor baseball and what is something that other people can understand. And it can also be really helpful to slide whatever it is you're working on in front of somebody who's not a specialist like you and say, what are you taking from what I've read or what I've written? So, really trying to break down, this is not about dumbing things down, but really breaking down core concepts. And this can actually be done in very succinct ways. You don't have to write an entire side story about any sort of theoretical idea, but really just thinking about like, what is it that people need to understand about something that might be very complex to keep them in the story. The last thing you want is for someone to have to go onto another page and look up a word because they're gone. That's it. They're not coming back. So how do you hold on to someone's attention? And you know how to do this because you're an anthropologist. We're really good at storytelling. So it make it into a fun challenge for yourself. And I think that that's one of the best things that you can do to keep yourself engaged. You're having an opportunity to relearn what it is you already know from a different perspective. Um, I also recommend reaching out to editors. It is true that they receive a lot of emails, but you don't need everyone to answer you. You really just need one person to answer you, right? You can send in your pitch, you can write to them, you can say, hey, I have this idea for a story. Is this something that you would be interested in reading a pitch about? You can ask them. And the editors that I know through the program that I worked in are very, very generous and kind people. They're very busy people, but they truly care about their work and they're very invested in public education, especially the people who work at scientific magazines. I mean, they're very, very kind. So if you can capture their attention, they are really just fountains of knowledge and can offer a lot of very succinct guidance that can help you a lot. So don't be afraid to get into someone's inbox and ask them to, can I talk to you for 5, 10 minutes? I have a specific question about this. Does this sound like I'm a fit for you? Um, you would be surprised. Give people the benefit of the doubt. Um, and the last thing that I think I really learned at Sapiens is head before heart or heart before head. My gosh, messed that up. Um, you have a better chance of getting someone to care about something that would otherwise sound very scary if you are able to connect with them on a human level to help them understand why what you're writing is important. So really think about that. What is an image, a scene, a moment that inspired awe, that made you laugh, that caused you to question the way you think? Those are the things that you need to stand out in a crowd when you consider how many different, life moments, chores, tasks, other articles are vying for people's attention. So really think about those moments. Um, and I think lastly, I would say that you want to give a lot of consideration to yourself in this process. As I said, you are going to have to advocate as well for what you want, how you want to write. As Suanna mentioned, there are a lot of style guides out there, but there are also style guides that we at Sapiens, when we were working there, we had a really fantastic copy editor who put together the Sapiens style guide. And so that's a style guide for anthropologists that pulls from Black, Indigenous, Latinx, um, journalist standards. And so that can also be very useful for you as a tool guide. And I'm going to send the links in the chat. It's really helpful for you. Things like when to capitalize words, the kinds of terms that we use now, those things are always changing. And if you need something to fall back on, that can be very, very helpful. Um, Lastly, before I share those links, writing can be a pleasure. I really think that in academia, looking back on it, I rarely took pleasure in reading academic writing. It's a sad, hard thing to say. I would like to say that publish or perish has not helped, right? People are really cranking things out. And the way that you read in academia is not to enjoy the journey. It's to extract information that you can probably use to prop something else you're saying up. Is anyone enjoying reading this? I don't think so. And I think that's a real shame, right? Because you forget that writing can be an art, right? The art of communicating with people. And this is a skill that you will hone over time if you decide that this is something that you're interested in. But people want to read to enjoy it. They want to be taken on a journey. They want you to take them by the hand and walk them through whatever experience it is that you are trying to lay out for them. So you are going to be challenged in that regard because you have to switch gears in your head. No one's going to want to read. No one wants to read my dissertation. I don't want to read my dissertation. Okay. I didn't write it for me. I wrote it for my committee, right? Usually under a lot of pressure. um, Writing can be a pleasure, and it should be a pleasure for you. And it should be a pleasure for the people who are reading it. And so all of those elements of awe and wonder and frustration, bring those into your writing because that really is what makes it so beautiful. And it's the only way that you're really going to be able to convey the very important messages that you as experts have to share with the world. Um, I'm going to stop there because I'm very conscious of the time. What I am going to do is pop in the chat one of the last projects that I worked on with the Sapiens team, which is a online free program that walks you through how to pitch, how to think about your story. A lot of the elements that I just shared, you can find them here. It's totally free to the public. You are more than welcome to go on and go back to it anytime you like. And you can also find the style guide. I will share that as well on the Sapiens page. Those are part of the archive. They are there to be used, and they are excellent resources. So I highly recommend that you check those out.
Mm.
And I'm just sharing them now, but yeah, I'll stop there. Natalie, back to you.
I feel like we all just got a crash course. It is really incredible. um, Really incredible amount of information. Thank you for sharing that Sapiens information. There are so many things that I'm sure so many of us didn't know about and have some threads to pull on when we leave. So this conversation. We'll wrap it up there as per the recording, and now we'll